This is You Can Raise Great Kids. Isn't it time to have the relationship you've always wanted with your kids? One where you don't feel so emotionally out of control, and where you don't lie awake at night worrying about drugs, alcohol, and more. On this show, you'll learn how to shed your frustration and confusion and instead guide your kids and teens safely through the challenges of growing up with calm compassion instead of conflict. Let's get started and raise great kids.
Episode 10. Hi, welcome back to You Can Raise Great Kids. Today we're going to be talking about how to minimize conflicts with your teenagers. I know that's something that many parents really struggle with, and they struggle with themselves, and they worry that they're doing the wrong thing or saying the wrong thing, and they struggle with their kids because they're afraid that their kids are like out of control. And it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to feel that way. So today I'm going to give you some real important strategies and tips that will help to minimize the conflicts that you and your teen engage in. So first of all, I'm going to offer this to you, and it's not going to be an easy thing for most parents, and that is when you're actually talking to your teen, do not judge what they say, and do not offer advice. I know we want to solve all their problems for them, and it comes from a good place in your heart, but that's really not going to work very well. So please don't judge what they say and don't offer advice. In other words, if your teen starts to tell you about something that went bad at school that day, don't then start to say, oh, well, you should have, or why didn't you, or something like that. And so that would be judging. And don't offer advice. So the simple thing to do is just to say, oh, I see. That must have been really frustrating for you, or that must have made you angry, or you must have felt left out, or something like that. Be empathetic instead of offering judgment or advice. The next thing is, whenever possible, do offer specific praise for certain things. So anytime your child or your teen does something that's right, or they do something they do something well, offer very specific praise. For instance, hey, thank you for helping me clean off the table. Or thank you for the way that you played so nicely with your younger brother. Or I noticed that you shared the remote control so quickly and easily when your little sister wanted to watch the next show. Or whatever it might be. Just name it very specifically and let them know that you noticed they did something well. After a while, if you do this repeatedly, they're going to look for your praise instead of looking for your judgment, and you're constantly offering advice. This will begin to, if you combine these first couple of things, you're going to begin to turn things around really fast. Really stick with it. Keep your mouth shut. But when you want to offer judgment or offer advice, keep your mouth shut. Walk away, take a deep breath, purposely zip your lip, whatever it takes. Keep your mouth shut, and instead, every time you get an opportunity, offer very specific praise and thanks for something that they've done well. Because you have to recognize that as they get older, their needs are going to change. And one of those needs is the need for independence. And even though it's really hard for us as parents to let go of that, because for a long time you were responsible for making all of their schedules and getting them where they needed to be, they need to begin to take ownership of their choices and the things that they do, the things that they say, and all we can do is try to influence them. And the best way to do that is to offer very specific praise and to just be there and be a good listening ear. The other thing is you're going to need to change your expectations for how much time they spend with you, maybe what they're going to share with you. You know, you could have a 10 or 11-year-old who shares everything with you. By the time they get to be 13 or 14, they may share nothing with you. Your expectations are going to need to change because this is all a part of them growing toward independence, which is a totally normal thing. We don't want them to live with us forever, right? We need them to be able to become more independent. And they won't become more independent if we're constantly putting our own views and our own desires and expectations on top of them. And the trick, of course, is knowing where you hold on and continue to try to give some guidance that's necessary because they're not old enough and mature enough yet, and knowing when to let go. And that's going to be just something you're going to have to play with, and it's going to be different for every child that you have. What may work with your first child at 14 may not work with your second child until he or she is 16. So don't be afraid to kind of, you're going to make mistakes. And that's a good thing to explain to your kids too. Hey, I'm really sorry. It looks like the things that we were talking about last weekend just aren't working out. Let's sit down and we're going to try to fix that again. And whenever possible, as they're getting older and more mature and they're heading toward more and more independence, offer choices. And this is actually a great thing for little kids too. I mean, maybe you only give a 3-year-old 2 choices, the blue cup or the red cup. Maybe when you take a 9-year-old to the store, you say, well, you can have this cereal, or this cereal. Which one would you like? As many choices as you can. That way they feel like they have some control over their own lives. And teenagers need this even more than the little kids do, even though the little ones are often the ones who throw themselves on the floor and kick their feet and scream and have temper tantrums. We've seen that teenagers can have their own version of a temper tantrum too. So whenever possible, offer them choices. Because one of the things that we need to do is, as I said, find that balance. And a way to do that is to decide what in your family is a non-negotiable and compare that to everything else which is negotiable. And like I said, that's going to change depending on how old they are. So a non-negotiable. You and your parenting partner need to sit down and decide what your non-negotiables are. Maybe it's no drugs, no alcohol, no lying, and no stealing. But then you also need to have some positive things in your life too. So maybe you say, do treat people with respect, or whatever it might be. Come up with a list, really short list of non-negotiables. Everything else is negotiable because they need to be, starting at about 14 or 15, depending on your kid, they need to have some power and control over their own lives. They need to practice making choices. So you can't hold them in too long, otherwise they're going to rebel and you're going to have the conflict. So for instance, even something else like curfew. Well, a non-negotiable might be, we're going to have curfew. You need to be home at night. I can certainly understand that. You don't want them showing up at 6 or 7 o'clock the next morning, right? So maybe you say, there will be a curfew. Well, maybe when they're 13, you talk about what the curfew is going to be. And of course, at 13, they're going to need rides. When they get to be 16 or 17 and they have their license and the curfew becomes more in their own control, maybe when they're 16 you say on Friday night the curfew is 11:30 or 11 or whatever it is for your family. And then when they get to be 17 and they've followed through on the curfew at the age of 16 and they've shown up regularly, everybody's going to make a little mistake once in a while. Don't freak out. We could talk about that at another time. But if they've been consistent about following through on the curfew and they say to you at some point, hey, I've been doing this for a long time and I've been good with the curfew, but I really think that I need to have a later curfew. I need to have midnight. Now, I know in our state that I think midnight is the latest that kids are allowed to drive. So once they get to be 17 and they're going to be graduating in a year or less, that's probably a good thing to begin to negotiate as long as they can follow through. As soon as they can't follow through, then you need to sit down and talk about it. Not freak out. You sit down and talk about it. If they come in late, you don't freak out. You sit down and talk about it calmly the next day. So those are some of the things that you can do to minimize the conflicts. Another thing that you can do, which is really great, and this is for parents, so if you're listening and you're a teen, close your ears now, is let them think that what you're suggesting is really their idea. Come up with ways to make it feel like it's their idea, and then they're much more likely to buy into it. I'm not sure how you're going to do that. It really depends on what the topic is. But that's true for anybody. If you're running a meeting at work or whatever it might be, anytime you can let somebody think that something is their idea, then that's terrific. My husband's really good at that. I have a great story to share with you, too. Our daughter, who's now about to graduate from college and go on into nursing school, is when she was in high school, and I forget if she was a junior or a senior, something like that, and there was some big movie that was coming out, and it had a midnight showing on a school night. You know how they do that? I don't know why they do that, but they do. They know all the kids are going to want to see the movie, and the opening night is on a Wednesday or a Thursday, right? So she wanted to go to this opening night with her friends, and my husband and I initially said, no, it's a school night. You're not going to go to a movie that starts at midnight just because that's the first day that it's available. You can go the next night. It's not a problem. And she hung her head and was disappointed, and then she walked away. And a little while she came back and she said, I don't do drugs. I don't do alcohol. I don't stay out and party. I do all my homework. I get really good grades. You know, can I just stay out this one night? Can I just go to this movie this one night? I know I won't have a whole lot of sleep. I'll probably fall asleep in class the next day. I'm willing to deal with the consequences of that, whatever it may be. Can I do this? And my husband and I looked at each other and we said, you know, she's right. She's absolutely right. So that was the first. I think she did another movie opening like that another 1 or 2 times before she graduated. But that was a case where she came back to us very rationally and said, you know, I've grown past what your rules were. I've grown past what your expectations were. And it's time for me to be able to make some of my own choices. And we totally agreed with her when she pointed out that she's done everything else really, really well. So I put that in your lap, and I encourage you to take a look at your teenager and find a way to reduce the conflicts in your lives by going through some of these steps and procedures. And please let me know how this goes for you. I would love to hear about it. So I encourage you, please, if you liked this podcast, this episode, please share it with your family and friends so that other people can minimize the conflict in their lives as well. And remember, most of these tips that I teach you for teens and kids, they're applicable in a lot of situations in life with your spouse, with your friends, with your coworkers. So you can share this with lots of people, all right? So please share this with your friends and your family members. Please subscribe to You Can Raise Great Kids in iTunes, and I would love to hear from you. So, and in fact, if you could even do a ratings and a review, that would help spread the message so this whole podcast doesn't get buried in iTunes, but it rises to the top and more people can find it. So I hope that you've enjoyed this podcast, this episode, and I will look forward to seeing you next time when your life is a lot less conflicted with your teenager.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download at www.audibletrial.com/greatkids. Over 85,000 titles to choose from for your iPod or MP3 player. Thanks for tuning in to today's show, where you get the best strategies and tips for how to raise great kids with calm compassion instead of with conflict. If you would like a strategy session to figure out how to bridge the gap between where your family is and where you want to go, sign up at youcanraisegreatkids.com/workshop. We'll see you next time.